Dr. Robinson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Robinson, your journey is truly inspiring, considering the diverse career paths you have taken throughout your life. And also, so to start this off, could you tell us a bit about what initially drew you to science? I mean, your background is in chemistry. So could you tell us what drew you to chemistry first and how the journey changed into what you are doing now? So if you can describe what you're doing now as well.
Thank you, yes. Well, if we go back to my childhood, as a child I was very interested in the world. Very curious to find out as much as I could about the world. And I remember how exciting it was to get an encyclopedia which I thought contained everything that there was to know, and that was very exciting for me. The biggest excitement came when I was given a chemistry set as a present when I think I was about 10. And when I was working with the chemistry set, you could see gases coming off something and you could see things changing colour. And I realised there was a lot going on behind what you could see with your eyes. And I was interested to know what might be the explanations for the things that you could see when you did these experiments. So that was what drove me in the direction specifically of chemistry.
Okay.
And it was just to find out how the world worked in that particular part and be able to understand just what was going on in this wonderful world of ours. I studied chemistry at school, and when I was doing chemistry at school, I thought, I don't think this is quite all there can be to it. There must be more to it than this. And that's what made me choose chemistry as my main subject when I went to do my undergraduate degree. But as part of that, I had very good advice from my mum about how to choose things to study. She herself was a maths teacher, and she said to me, do maths for as long as you can, because not everybody can do it, and it's exciting in a different way from science, because she had love of maths. So I followed as much maths as I could into my degree, and that meant when it came to choose my project at the end of my undergraduate degree, it was very much in the numerical, mathematical part of chemistry called physical chemistry. Okay. One day in the lab, in the undergraduate lab, I had just done an experiment, and the tutor said to me, "You've just confirmed a result that somebody has just produced in California or some part of the world." And I thought, new things happen in science labs. It was very exciting to get that notion that you might be doing something that somebody hadn't done, that nobody had done before. So that's why I decided to do a PhD. And my PhD was in how molecules within photochemical smog, you know, that smog that you would have had much more of in the past, free radical molecules reacting in the presence of sunlight to form smog. So my PhD was in looking at how fast different reactions go in smog, and therefore being able to predict the modelling of smog formation, and then to find out what would be good things to do to try to reduce smog, what would help. And part of that would be related to things like catalytic converters, that sort of thing. So my work channeled down into that very specific piece of chemistry, but for me it was important because it related to something that was important in the world. And at the end of my PhD, I decided that I wanted to give myself a slightly bigger platform for how my career might develop. And so at the time when I was completing the writing up of my PhD, I took a postgraduate course in school education so that I could become a qualified teacher.
Okay.
So that took me to the point where I was then having to decide what would happen next.
And so your beginning was in science. Did you bring anything you learned specifically from science when you went into the field that you are now, which is educational law and criminology, as you said?
It is, yes it is. Very much so. So what happened after that was I decided that as I moved through my research career, the parts that I was really enjoying most were the parts where it was explaining the science, and maybe I had become slightly less focused on the very specific part of chemistry that I'd been following for my PhD. However, I became very interested in how science was understandable to people. So I was bringing so I wanted to be able to translate science into ways that could be accessible, which I think is something that's quite close to your hearts.
I do resonate with you when you said understanding science is really what you interested you, because it's the same for me. I like, I'm not a particular teacher, but I do like talking about science with people and making it simplified so anyone can understand it easily. And I think this is something that a lot of people are thinking. I mean, compared to decades ago, science has changed very rapidly. There are so many new things coming out every day. But when it comes to education, we see the same theory-based classrooms for decades and decades. We learn the same way that our parents did when it comes to primary and secondary education. What is your take on it? Do you think there should be policy changes on that? Well, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, big thoughts. It's very important that we get education as right as it can be for children coming through their schooling. As part of my career path, I had the privilege of being able to be visiting many, many schools, and the purpose of that was to be able to observe and experience what the children were experiencing, and to be able then to give advice to the school about how it might improve, having conversations with teachers about their teaching, and with the children about how it was going for them. So I've had a hugely privileged access to actually seeing what it really is like in probably hundreds of schools in Scotland through that part of my career. So it allows you to see actually firsthand what parts of a child's experience might be having the biggest impact on their well-being and on their learning, and also what we might need to think about in terms of making sure what they're learning is up to date and so on. So there are two things come out of that. One is the importance of a school as a place for children to feel safe and nurtured and to develop. And that's the sort of environment and the relationships between teachers and the people and the children who are learning there. And I'm convinced that will remain absolutely essential, the vital part that schooling can play in a child's growth and well-being, which comes through positive relationships and encouragement from teachers. The second part of it is, what should the children be learning? And how does that need to change as we look at a completely different world, as you say, where schools have been pretty similar for decades. I think the challenge here is, and one that we were faced with in the part of my work which was involved in looking at the school curriculum for Scotland. So that was the what should children learn. And one of the things we tried to do there was to think, well, why should children be learning? What are the purposes of education? And if we can be very clear about what we're aiming for through schooling, then it helps us to design better programs for learning for them, if you like. So we focus a lot on what the purpose of schooling should be, and that it should be to enable you to be a learner all your life, to enable you to be able to manage your well-being and to be healthy, to be able to interact and support other people as part of your schooling, and a set of priorities, which we then have tried to convert into the what children should learn.
Yeah.
And that was done a number of years ago, and some elements of that have been really quite successful, but it really needs to be looked at again. And that's where looking at the purposes and the range of new tools that come in, and you've got ChatGPT and you've got AI, huge opportunities there really to change how at what a child learns, I think they will always need to have the teacher by their side.
Yes.
But being able to have it tailored and individualised and challenging, so that each child is given the right amount of challenge and learns to develop in the context of challenging things to learn. I mean, the scope there is enormous, and we really have to do all we can to encourage those who are setting policies for education to have those sorts of things in mind when they look in the future.
Yeah. We were talking about policy changing before, so how can young people, especially like women who are in this field, can engage with the process of policy making, and so that we can actually be a part of causing real change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In order to make changes, to influence change, I think one of the first things is to think, where am I sitting, and what are the possible routes for me to have influence? And sometimes that can be on a very large scale, at a national level. For me, I became part of the civil service in Scotland, and that gave me direct access to the actual government policy process and bringing advice to that process and seeing it moving through either to changes in practice or not. However, I think everyone has their own sphere of influence, if you like, and it's quite I've had to think about this for myself in different ways. What are the things that you are able to influence? And sometimes it may be that you can influence a big thing, but there are other ways in which you might be able to influence at a more local level. My starting point for getting into that policy world was following on from what I was saying about widening access to education for people who didn't have the traditional type of entrance qualifications. And the opportunity that I had there was to be part of a team which had the specific task of seeing whether it would be possible to widen access to higher education by influencing locally, including local universities, and seeing if we could persuade them to admit people who might not have had traditional qualifications. So that's very much a developmental influence of policy, and finding a developmental activity that's going on that's relevant, if that's possible in this area, is a great way of influencing practice, and then that can then potentially multiply up into wider policy questions. Other things, as an interested and an informed citizen, finding the ways of making your voice heard. Of course, that can be political, can't it? And it can be through working with organisations who are fostering the sorts of things that you believe in, and like chromosome 6 is that kind of, you're actually doing that kind of thing, aren't you, when you think about it? It's finding ways to change people's ways of thinking and helping them. So it's that sitting down and thinking, what are my possible spheres for influence, and then carving that out in your own way. Another upcoming, increasing area and would be things like citizens' assemblies, and getting involved in that, where you have the chance to explore a complex issue, bring an evidence-based mind to those discussions, and I think increasingly that type of thing might well be more influential.
We always imagine us sitting at a bench doing lab work, but when you grow up in this field, you realize it's more than that. It's stuff like budgeting, staff recruitment. There's so much to science than just bench work. So which of these do you find challenging as someone who is deep in?
Yes, you definitely have to start branching out into these broader things. I think as you progress in your career in different directions, you will be having to work with budgets and,
Yes.
and so on. For me, the one that really did frighten me first of all most was the budgeting one, because I mentioned the team that I led. Very small team, but we had a budget, and we had to decide how to spend it, and that it really was quite daunting if you had any experience that at all. So the great thing, I think, it's worked right the way through my career, is find the right person to help you to do it.
Yes.
And it was like having a big weight lifted off when I had the expert person in this type of thing explaining to me the kind of thinking that we needed to do in order to set a budget, which would then be matched to the priorities of the work that we were doing, and it wasn't nearly as hard as it seemed. So the lesson I take out from that is get help from the people who can really take you through it, and it was that I would always, looking back, that's always been the way I've gone about things. Find the person who can probably do it better than you can do it yourself. Of those things, the one that you listed there, the one that I loved more than any of the others, was the opportunity to be involved in recruiting and finding people who would fit the role that we wanted them to play, whether it was in a developmental team, or I mentioned evaluation in schools. If you're recruiting people who are going to be going into schools and evaluating schools, they have to be chosen with great care, and that was one of my responsibilities when I was involved in that work. And then the satisfaction that flows from that as they grow and flourish and make their own ways is one of the greatest satisfactions of my career. You know, when you see people flying.
Something that we've seen, it's everywhere. So we see a lot of women in early education of science, even in graduate programs and early careers in science. But when we go to the senior positions, we see that number of women decreasing. Why do you think that might be?
Yes. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah, there's definitely something there. Although I've been, and you'll know of many women who you can look on as role models who have decided that that's the place they want to be, and are doing wonderful jobs in very senior positions, and I've had a lot of contact with women in those positions. So, but why maybe are there slightly? Could we think about having more women in these senior roles? The first thing I would say is one of the other things that I do is a mentoring scheme, which is actually called Crossing Thresholds, which means moving through in promotion. Yeah. And it's been very interesting that the women I've mentored in that scheme, the first decision had to be, do I want to be promoted? Do I want a structural progression, or do I want progression in the things that I enjoy most? And some of them actively have chosen, and I did it myself actually, not to go up to the next level, but rather wanted to broaden at the level they were at and do other very important, these would be people in influential work, but for them, they wanted to broaden rather than go up the ladder. And that, for them, each of these is an individual, personal decision for each woman to make on her own. So if we can see that, I think the best thing is that is a decision that you make in a really informed and thoughtful way, with lots of discussion with people about how far do you want to go in terms of promotion and progression.
Imposter syndrome. I think we all have felt that at least once in our lives. And sometimes constantly for some people more than the others. Have you gone through any stage of your life with this particular thought in your head, feeling imposter syndrome?
Definitely, I've felt it at various points in my career. I think most notably when I would have been promoted into quite a senior position and be quite a lot younger than the team, most members of the team that I was leading. And I decided that I had to have a plan for how I would address this feeling that they were much more knowledgeable, experienced than me, and I was to lead the team. And first of all, I tried to remind myself that I had been put in that position and somebody had made a decision that I was the right person for that job. It's sometimes easy to lose sight of the fact that you are supposed to be there. And I find it quite reassuring just to almost say, you're meant to be there, you've been put there. And that sort of lets you just sit up a little bit straighter and feel a little bit more confident. And then actively working on what I would need to do so that I would not be an imposter and actually do the thing really as well as I could, and be able to ultimately both me feeling that I was in the right role, but my team also had to feel the same thing.
Yes.
So by working on the things that I needed to do to help to establish myself with the right credibility in the role, and putting efforts into that, and then you sort of live the role, as it were. But yes, it's definitely one to be aware of and notice when it's happening, and have ways of just having that conversation in your head. You're meant to be there.
Yes. Your journey is actually very interesting for me when I saw your pathway that you took. And it showed your resilience, how determined you are to get to this point, and how much you actually wanted to make a difference in this world. So, before we conclude this, can you give any advice that you have to our listeners, especially women who are interested to work in STEM? Do you have any advice for us?
The biggest piece of advice would be, do something that lets you be yourself. Do something that allows you to do the things that help you to flourish. Don't force yourself into something because you think it might be the right thing to do or a sensible thing to do. Choose the path that will allow you to be authentic to yourself, and which allows you to follow the things that you really believe in, and that means that you will do really well, because you will flourish more in a field where you feel comfortable that what you're doing chimes with your own values and your own priorities. And that's if you're ever in a role where you feel that the expectations clash with what you really believe that you're for, it's a very, very uncomfortable place to be, and to be always on the lookout and make sure that it's what you're doing is the thing that's right for you, and find that path that's right for you, and all that goes with that. And the signs of that are how you feel about what you're doing and the kind of satisfactions that it's giving you, and that they're lined up with your ambitions and your values.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and they were invaluable insights for our listeners today. And your journey has been inspiring, and I think it will continue to inspire people furthermore. And I wish you, on behalf of all our team, the Chromosome 6 team, that you will succeed in whatever you do in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.